Good, happy Friday evening, and welcome to this Friday evening edition of the Riley King Network Investigates. Let's begin. Good, happy Friday evening, everyone. I'm Riley King, and welcome to this Friday evening edition of the Riley King Network Investigates. The Chameleon is Friday, January 22nd, 2021. Let's begin tonight's edition right now. Serial killer Terry Rasmussen's victims, known and unknown. Authorities have connected 5 murders to Rasmussen, and they fear there are more. A dedicated detective refused to stop digging after she solved the brutal murder of a chemist in California. Then, by reopening an earlier case, she helped a genetic genealogist to discover the identity of the girl the killer claimed was his daughter, and then the killer's true identity. Their hard work, along with that of dogged research, ultimately unrevealed a long trail of missing and murdered women and children, all leading back, police say, to a serial killer. Known by a lengthy list of aliases, Terry Rasmussen has been dubbed the Chameleon Killer for assuming so many different identities as he infiltrated families and destroyed lives in New Hampshire and California. So, our suspect started in 1984 as Curtis Kimball. Then he had Gordon Jensen. Then he was using Larry Vanner. And now it turns out in the early 1980s, back in New Hampshire, he was using Bob Evans. Santa Bernardino County, California Sheriff Deputy Peter Hadley explained, all the same guy. Rasmussen has been linked to 5 horrific murders, and authorities fear there are more. These are stories of women and children he is suspected of killing. One he confessed to murdering, and those whose lives he changed forever. Victims tied to Rasmussen: Marsley Elizabeth Honeychurch. Honeychurch, who was born in Connecticut in 1954, was married twice and had a daughter with each husband. Mary E. Vaughn was the firstborn in 1971. Then Sarah L. McWaters was born in 1977, according to the New Hampshire Department of Justice. Honeychurch's sister, Roxanne Burroughs, and Michelle remember her as bubbly and quirky, and said she had a good sense of humor. Marlies was excited to be a mom. She loved her kids dearly. Honeychurch was last seen at her mother's house in La Putte, California around Thanksgiving in 1978. It was there that she introduced her family to her boyfriend, Terry Rasmussen, according to the New Hampshire Department of Justice. I don't remember exactly what happened, Paula Hodge, Honeychurch's other sister, said. I just heard that they had an engagement, Marsley and my mom. My mom might have said something to her, as he, too, old for you. Why are you with him? Hodges said. She went with Terry, and they left. Never called, never contacted nobody, just disappeared. Honeychurch was 24 at the time, according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Police believe she died 1 or 2 years later, making her 26 to 27 when she died. David Salmon, Honeychurch's brother, remembered the lengths to which their family went to find Honeychurch and her daughters. It was just a situation where every time we search, we come to a dead end. Come to a dead end. Come to a dead end. Through the years, my mother always said, you know, something's not right. Where is she? Hodges remembered. It was sad. We had a sister that was gone. A sister and 2 nieces. Mary Yvonne. The remains of Mary and her mother, Honeychurch, were found in the first of 2 barrels that were discovered at Bear Brook State Park in November 1987. They weren't identified until 2019. At that time, authorities believe Mary was 8 to 10 years old at the time of her death. It was very surreal that a mother and daughter were actually inside the barrel itself, disposed of like common trash. John Cody, a former New Hampshire State Police detective, said. Jeff Morgan, who grew up in a small trailer park surrounded by Bear Brook, was 11 when he and his friends stumbled upon the barrels. We were playing a game of hide and seek, Morgan said. I was approached by one of the kids in the group that he had come upon a barrel out in the middle of the woods, which was off the trail. It was just odd that the barrel was out there. It was a slightly rusted dark blue barrel. It was a blue 55-gallon steel drum. It was kind of sitting out in the woods. The brother that found the barrel went over to it and tried to lift the top of the barrel, and when he did that, we were hit with a smell of absolutely putrid. One of the brothers just pushed the barrel over, and we watched the barrel fall on its side, Morgan said. The guys jumped on the four-wheeler, and we booted out of there, and that was the last time we saw the barrel. At that time, Morgan and his friends didn't know there were remains inside the barrel. 4 months later, Ron, who was in Allenstown, New Hampshire, a police officer at the time, got a call from dispatch to meet a hunter at the edge of the woods. He was very, very white and very pale. He said to me, there's a barrel in the woods, and I think there's bodies inside. Police later determined the female adult and child, unidentified at the time, had died of blunt force trauma to their heads. They were buried together at a local Allenstown cemetery with a donated gravestone that read, "Here lies the mortal remains known only to God of a woman aged 23 to 33 and a girl age child, 8 to 10. Their slain bodies were found on November 10th, 1985 in Bear Brook State Park. May their souls find peace in God's loving care. And then on June 8th, 2000, the remains of Mary and Honeychurch, which were still unidentified at the time, were exhumed from the graves by authorities from DNA testing. Sarah L. McWaters. In 2000, 15 years after the first barrel was discovered, Sarah's body was found inside a separate barrel at Bear Brook State Park along with the body of an unknown child. Sarah is believed to have been 2 to 3 years old at the time when she was killed, according to authorities. Sarah, her half-sister, Maria, and their mother, Honeychurch, were unknown persons until authorities announced their identities at a press conference on June 6, 2019. Rebecca Heath, a research librarian who said she became obsessed with the case, helped identify the woman and the 2 children through her own sleuthing on an online message board. She connected with a woman who was looking for her missing family members, a woman and her 2 daughters whose ages and locations matched that of Honeychurch, Sarah, and Maria. The woman also told Heath that her missing family member had once married a man with the last name Rasumi. As Heath was calling in the tip to authorities, investigative genetic genealogist Barbara was also uncovering the 3 victims' identities through a new technology that involves extracting DNA from the shaft of a strand of hair. In November of 2019, Honeychurch and her older daughter, Maria Vaughn, were laid to rest together with a new headstone bearing their names in Allenstown, New Hampshire. Honeychurch's youngest daughter, Sarah, was laid to rest in Connecticut near her father's family. We're here today to bury my sister and my niece, Salmon said at Honeychurch and Mary's funeral. We, as a family, would like to thank the community for caring and loving our sister, Marsley, and our nieces, Maria and Sarah. We have looked and searched over 30 years for them. With no luck, we have never stopped looking, he said. Although this moment is bittersweet, they had their names back on this day. They can rest in peace. Thank you all from the bottom of our hearts. And then, an unknown child. The remains of a young girl, age 2 to 4, was found in a second barrel with Sarah's remains in 2000. To this day, she has not yet been identified. New Hampshire authorities have referenced to her as the middle child because of her suspected age comparison to the other 2 children found in barrels. But DNA tests confirm she is not related to Sarah or Maria, nor their mother. In 2016, their child was determined to be Rasumi's biological daughter. You know, people ask me why I do these interviews. It's because there's still one victim out there, former Detective Cody said. There is one girl who we don't know who she is. That's why I do these interviews, to get her identity. And so there's closure for the families involved here. That's the only reason. Rhea Venter said that in viewing the timeline of Rasumi, it appears most likely that his daughter was born in Texas, possibly the Gulf Coast, if Rasumi was working on an oil rig at the time. Ongoing genealogical efforts have revealed that Jane Doe's mother relatives may have come from Pearl River County, Mississippi. Salmon said he and his family call the girl Angel. The focus from this day forward should be to find the family of that little girl, he said. Unsoon June, a chemist from California, was the first victim authorities were able to tie to Rasumi. June was in her mid-40s when she introduced her family to her new boyfriend, Larry Vanner, whom authorities later identified as Rasumi, according to the New Hampshire Department of Justice. He didn't even look healthy. His face was gray. He smoked constantly, June's friend, Renee Rose, said. Larry would just grab up everything on the table and bleach and eat more, and then he'd go sit up on the couch. June disappeared from Richmond, California in June of 2002, approximately 2 years after Vanner met her family and friends. Vanner fended off her loved one's questions with arrays of excuses. He would say, well, she's busy taking care of her mother, or she was going to get some therapeutic help. Rose said Vanner told her he would say she decided she didn't like me anymore and didn't want me in her life. Who could believe him for 1 second? Rose said she told him, I want Unsoon, not you. I want Unsoon to tell me that she's done with our relationship, or I'm going to get the sheriff involved. Rose ultimately went to the Contra Coast County Sheriff, where Roxanne, who was the homicide detective. He was polite and soft-spoken and very smart with his twinkly blue eyes. He could get somebody or two maybe trust him, Roxanne said. All we were really trying to do is to determine where Unsoon was and if she was okay, and he wasn't being cooperative with that at all. When somebody's story keeps changing, it means that they have either made something up, can't remember what they told you the first time, or that they're lying to you, she added. While searching for Vanner's California home, Roxanne and fellow detective located an enormous pile of cat litter in a crawl space, big, like 4 to 5 feet around, and probably 2 to 3 feet, she said. I stood there for just a few seconds. There was no odor, I remember, seeing an axe lined up. Buried in that cat litter, police found a human foot, completely mummified, wearing a flip-flop. Ultimately, the body was identified as June, who police determined had died of blunt force trauma to the head. When I got up in the morning, I pulled my shades back. There was clouds and a beautiful blue sky, and there was seagulls circling in the sky. They were beautiful, and I went, this can't be, Rose said, of learning her friend was gone. I closed the blinds back up. How could it be bright and sunny when a noon's dead? Roxanne said she later determined a man matching Vanner's description had brought 10 bags of cat litter from a nearby pet store in November of 2002. He was arrested for June's murder, and in 2003 he was sentenced to prison for 15 years to life after he pleaded guilty to the crime. Vanner died in prison in December of 2010 of natural causes. His true identity was Terry Rasumi, was not revealed by authorities until 2017. I guess dying serves him right, Rose said. I wished he'd lived longer so we would have suffered longer in prison myself. More possible victims. Denise. In 1981, Denise went missing shortly after Thanksgiving with her 6-month-old daughter and her boyfriend, Rasumi, who she had known as Robert T. Evans, according to the New Hampshire Department of Justice. Decades later, investigators discovered that Denise was the mother of the child known as Lisa, a little girl Rasumi claimed in the 1980s was his daughter, which DNA tests later confirmed wasn't true. Denise has never been located. When Lisa was taken into protective custody in 1986, police asked her if she had any siblings. Police believe her answer indicated they may have been killed by Rasumi too. The mother of the middle child. The mother of the middle child, the unidentified girl in the second barrel found in Bear Brook in 2000, who was determined to be Rasumi's biological daughter, also never been found nor identified. Authorities fear both Denise and the unidentified mother of the middle child are possible victims of Rasumi. Other victims. In 1995, scavengers found a refrigerator containing what former San Joaquin County Assistant Sheriff John believes may be another one of Rasumi's victims. The refrigerator had been dumped in a canal in San Joaquin County, California. Hubbard said the body of a woman was found in a state of advanced decomposition, and police couldn't discern the woman's facial features. She had been placed in the refrigerator with a pillow, sleeping bag, and what appeared to be several blankets, he said. Also in the refrigerator was a unique brand of milk that was only delivered to a certain area that matched up with where Rasumi had been at the time, Hubbard said. Additionally, Hubbard said the woman's remains bore the hallmarks of Rasumi's other victims. Hubbard says the investigation is stalled because she is still unidentified. The ones he left alive. Lisa. In the early 1980s, a man who said his name was Gordon Jensen was living in a trailer park in California with a little girl he called Lisa, who police say was about 4 or 5 years old at the time. Jensen arranged for Lisa to be picked up in Southern California for 2 weeks with another family, Catherine and Richard Decker. Jensen said after those 2 weeks, the Deckers could arrange for their daughter to be adopted, Lisa, police said. The Deckers came to believe Lisa might have been abused when they reached out to Jensen again to finalize the adoption. He had disappeared. After Jensen disappeared, the Deckers were unable to complete the adoption and Lisa was taken into protective custody. In 1989, Jensen, later identified as Rasumi, was arrested for child abandonment and was subsequently sentenced to 3 years in prison. Under his plea agreement, an additional charge of child abuse was dropped. Upon Rasumi's release from prison, according to State of California Department of Corrections, he broke parole and fled. Roxanne said. Years later, when Roxanne took on and soon June missing person case in 2002, she became determined to find out more about Rasumi's supposed daughter, Lisa, who had been mentored in his criminal history, including prior booking records. A portrait test comparing Rasumi blood from prison and a sample police had from a 5-year-old Lisa showed Rasumi was not her father. In 2003, when the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department opened a new case aimed at finding Lisa's biological family, she was approximately 22 years old. After countless hours of research, genetic genealogists found Armand, Lisa's maternal grandfather. Armand and the daughter of Denise is Lisa's mother. Lisa was born to Dawn in 1981, Armand said. Rasumi's other biological children. When authorities traced all of Rasumi's allies back to his true name, they found that in the early 1970s he had been married and fathered 4 children from that marriage. All of them are still alive. She said her mother and Rasumi got married in 1968 in Hawaii. And we will be right back. And welcome back. How a Jane Doe child case uncovered a serial killer, identified victims, and changed the use of DNA forensics. Former California homicide detective Roxanne had helped put a murderer behind bars, and yet there was something about the suspect that nagged at her. Something in his murky past that told her this wasn't the end of his story. It was 2003. The killer, who by then was known to authorities as Curtis Kimball, stunned the court when he suddenly stood up at pre-trial hearing and announced he wanted to plead guilty to murdering soon June. June was 44 years old California chemist he had been dating before she disappeared, and her dismantled body was found in her Richmond, California home. Kimball had originally pleaded no contest to a second-degree murder charge. He had also first told police his name was Larry Vanner, and they knew he had also used name Gordon Jensen. Roxanne, a former captain for the Costa Coast County Sheriff Office, who is now retired, had helped uncover the body. She couldn't stop thinking about how this man, a proven liar, had already served time on child abandonment charges for destroying a little girl he called his 5-year-old daughter, Lisa, 15 years prior. She believed Kimball's sudden decision to plead guilty was because he had overheard her telling another investigator in court that she was requesting a paternity test for Lisa, who by 2003 was in her early 20s. She refused to stop pushing the answers, although she and her fellow investigators knew Kimball had a lengthy criminal record. They wouldn't know the full scoop until years later. Eventually, Roxanne's efforts to uncover Lisa's past helped launch a new investigation that eventually led police to believe that Kimball, whose real name was Terry Rasumi, was in fact a prolific serial killer who used multiple aliases for years as he murdered women and children on both coasts. Investigators referred to him as the Chameleon. The Rasumi case helped change forensic investigations forever with introduction of the use of genealogical and technical that has helped point to suspects in other major cases, including the Golden State Killer case. Chasing a Ghost. In 2003, as far as Roxanne and her team knew, Rasumi's criminal record had started in 1985. He had been arrested in 85 as Curtis Kimball after he was involved in a car accident in Cypress, California, with Lisa in the car with him. He was charged with driving under the influence and endangering the welfare of a child. He failed to appear in court for these charges, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. By January 1986, authorities said Rasumi was living with Lisa in an RV park in Scotts Valley, California, where he worked as a handyman under the name Gordon Jensen. Richard and Kathy Decker, an older couple also living in the park, helped care for Lisa and had concerns about her well-being, so much so that they tried helping their daughter, who lived in Santa Barbara, California, adopt the little girl. Authorities believe Lisa was 4 to 5 years old at the time. The Deckers brought Lisa to Southern California to meet their daughter, but called police after they say Lisa said things that seemed to indicate she had been abused. Engaged her to finalize the adoption so that she would not be returned to him. The family discovered that Gordon Jensen had fled the RV park in June 1986 when police realized Gordon Jensen was a false identity and fingerprint records from a previous DUI arrest matched him to Curtis Campbell. They issued an arrest warrant. Rasumi was captured and charged with child endangerment as Curtis Kimball in March 1989. 2 months later, he pleaded guilty to child abandonment and received 3 years in prison. He served less than 2 and was paroled in October 1990. Then he disappeared again. Authorities said Rasumi resurfaced in California as Ansoon June's new boyfriend. She introduced him to her family in December of 1990, and he told them his name was Larry Vanner, according to authorities. When June disappeared in 2002, police questioned the man, who said his name was Larry Vanner, but his fingerprints records returned the match to Curtis Kimball. By 2003, California authorities knew Kimball, Vanner, and Jensen were all alias for the same name, but it would be another decade before they knew his real name was Terry Rasumi. A few weeks later, Rasumi pleaded guilty to June's murder under the name of Kimball. Roxanne learned the results of Lisa's portraiting test. Tracking down Lisa's real identity. Lisa's adoption to the Decker's daughter had fallen through in the 80s because the adoption papers were never signed. Rasumi fled before signing them, and he claimed her biological mother was deceased. Lisa was placed in Child Protective Services in Santa Barbara. She was eventually adopted, but she grew up believing Gordon Jensen was her father. Roxanne said she contacted Santa Barbara authorities to let them know they had a living Jane Doe child case, meaning a missing child that was still alive. About a week later, Roxanne said Santa Barbara authorities called her back, telling her, "Holy moly, we had no idea that this case had even existed." After years of dead ends, Detective Peter Hadley of Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office got Lisa's case in 2013. Hadley said he had Lisa sign up for Ancestry.com. First, they received 2 hits on 4 and 5th cousins, which were very distant relatives. Hadley said he then reached out to DNA Adoption, a website that helps adoptees identify birth families through their DNA matches, and genetic genealogist Dr. Barbara responded. Authorities had estimated Lisa was born around 1981 based on her dental development at the time. She was recovered in 1986, Ree Venter said. So, when Ree Venter started working on the case in 2015, she assumed Lisa was about 35 years old. She also had Lisa do a 23andMe test to narrow down her region of origin, which turned out to be the US and Canada. Meanwhile, Hadley reached out to cousins who matched with Lisa to ask them to submit DNA samples, and one of them agreed. Reventure said she also uploaded Lisa's DNA profile to 2 other genealogical databases, Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch.com, and asked the cousins Lisa had already matched with to do the same. From there, Reventure said she sculpted various family trees to try to find possible parents or grandparents matches for Lisa. As more cousins matched and revealed themselves, and more agreed to submit their DNA, Lisa's family tree became coming into focus. After thousands and thousands of hours working on the Lisa project, Reventure said her search ultimately pinpointed a man in New Hampshire named Armand. Turns out his daughter Denise had been missing for decades. Reventure had figured out that was Lisa's mother. Once they had confirmed DNA match from the grandfather that showed Lisa was related to him on her mother's side, Hadley called Lisa to give her the news. Lisa's birth name was Dawn Bogdan. The last time Armand said he saw his daughter and granddaughter was around Thanksgiving 1981, when Denise was with her then boyfriend man named Bob Evans. Baldwin and Evans announced they were leaving town because they owed people money. When Hadley got that information from Armand Baldwin, he said he sent photos to the Manchester police of the man they knew in California as Curtis Kimball, Larry Venner, and Gordon Jensen. Authorities in New Hampshire went to Baldwin to show him Kimball's mugshot. He identified him as Bob Evans. All the same guy, he added. At this point, investigators had connected the 3 mysteries back to the same person. The man who killed Unsoon June also had Lisa, now identified as Dawn Baldwin, with him for a time and had been with her biological mother, Denise, who hadn't been seen since 1981. So, in 2016, more than 30 years after Denise Baldwin went missing in New Hampshire, authorities opened a missing persons case for the first time. She had not been reported missing before then, because her father said, "We had no idea what to do, or where to go, or which way to turn." And unnoticed of Roxanne and Hadley and other California authorities at the time, investigators in New Hampshire had been bluffed by decades by complete different yet strange cold cases. 2 barrels, each containing 2 bodies, had been found 15 years apart in Bear Brook State Park, Allenstown, New Hampshire, that the case was soon going to get the biggest break in 3 decades. The Bear Brook murders, the 2 barrels, 4 bodies found 15 years apart. In 1985, while Curtis Kimball was in California with Lisa, New Hampshire police said a large, rusted blue barrel was found containing the remains of an adult woman about 23 to 33 years old, and a family child they believed at the time to be 5 to 11 years old. A second similar rusted barrel was discovered about 100 yards away in 2000. Police said it contained the remains of 2 female children, one believed to be a 2 to 4-year-old and the other between 1 to 3 years old. By 2016, none of the 4 victims nor their killer had been identified, but after the discovery of Lisa's real identity, police wondered if the adult victim was Denise Baldwin. New Hampshire authorities knew a man named Bob Evans had been in the state as far back as the late 70s, working as an electric and handyman. In 2017, New Hampshire authorities held a press conference announcing that Lisa's DNA did not match the adult victim, meaning she was not Denise Baldwin. But authorities said they had decided to test Bob Evans' DNA with the 4 bodies found in the barrel, and it had led them to a huge discovery. The child, dubbed by authorities as the middle child because of her age, was Bob Evans' biological daughter. She became a key for investigators to tie him to the barrel victims. It turns out that middle child was not related to the other 3 victims found in the barrel. However, DNA testing had determined that the adult victim was the mother of the other 2 children. At that point, authorities still didn't know who the barrel victims were, and they wanted to know if Bob Evans was yet another false name or a real name for the same killer. Ree Venter said she was called upon again this time to help identify the mystery killer. After a tremendous amount of work using the same DNA, profile mapping techniques, building out a family tree from matches to the killer's DNA profile, she eventually was able to crack it. Ree Venter said it was the first time that genetic genealogy had been used to help law enforcement solve crime cases. Terry Rasumi's daughter, he a serial killer. Rasumi had died in California prison of natural causes in 2010. But now that authorities knew his real identity, Hadley said they could retrace his whereabouts, piece together a timeline of his life, and try to find more victims. In June 2017, Diane, a formerly known Diane Rasumi, was working as a record clerk at a police station in Illinois when she got a call from her mother saying the New Hampshire State Police Cold Case Unit wanted to talk to them. When she met with officers, she said they laid out a sprawling tale about her father, whom she hadn't seen since she was around 6 years old. As she listened to the officers describing what her father had been accused of over the years, she said she realized the horrible truth about him. She said her father served in the U.S. Navy during the 60s, and her parents got married in Hawaii in 1968. The family also moved around when she and her 3 siblings were younger, she said. She said her mother left Rasumi and took the kids with her in 1975, shortly after Rasumi was arrested for aggravated assault, according to New Hampshire authorities. By then, the family was living in Arizona. She said the parents' divorce was finalized 3 years later. The last time she said she saw her father was in December 1975 or 1976, when she showed up at a family's home in Arizona, unannounced, with an unidentified woman. By the late 70s, authorities say Rasumi turned up in California soon after he was in New Hampshire. The long road to identify the Bear Brook victims. So by 2017, authorities had a much clearer picture of this mystical serial killer, but the identities of the 4 barrel victims in New Hampshire still remained a mystery. While Ree Venter was working with law enforcement, other amateur solstices following the Bear Brook murders had been trying to dig up new information on their own as well. One of those people was Rebecca Heath, a research librarian, who said she became obsessed with the Bear Brook case. She said she listened to Moon's Bear Brook podcast and spent hours combining through online message boards with posts about lost loved ones. As she looked, Heath said she tried to find posts that matched the information law enforcement had announced about the Bear Brook victims at the 2017 press conference. She said she would get a hunch and chase down the lead, then discard it when details didn't match up. But one day she found something that caught her eye. Heath also looked at Marlene's death certificate, but it couldn't find one, meaning she could still be alive or unidentified. Heath said she contacted one of the family members, posting onto a message board through Facebook, and started asking her questions about the girls. Meanwhile, during that time, Heath was poring over online posts. Ree Venter had came across an article about the new forensic technique that extracted autosome DNA from rootless hair. Dr. Ed Green, an associate professor of biological engineering at the University of California, worked on DNA technology development, and his lab had developed the new hair technique. Ree Venter asked New Hampshire authorities to send hair samples from Bear Brook victims to Green, who was able to extract the DNA from the victims' hair shapes. After she received the DNA profiles from Green's results, Ree Venter put DNA profiles for the 4 victims into a database and started building family trees for them, just as she had done before for Lisa and Rasumi. Ree Venter and Heath, hundreds of hours of research paid off. In June of 2019, as New Hampshire authorities announced they had identified 3 of the 4 Bear Brook victims. The adult victim was identified as Marsley Honeychurch. The oldest child was found in the first barrel with her in 1985, was identified as her daughter, Marie Vaughn. The youngest child, who was found in the second barrel in 2000, was identified as daughter Sarah McWaters. But to this day, the identity of the middle child, who was determined to be Rasumi's biological daughter, remains unidentified. By the time Sarah was born, police said Honeychurch and her girls had settled in California. The last time Honeychurch's family saw her was Thanksgiving 1978, when she introduced them to her boyfriend Terry Rasumi at a family gathering in California. According to New Hampshire authorities, Honeychurch's siblings said she got into a disagreement with her mother that day, and they never saw her or her girls again after that. Solomon said the family tried to find Honeychurch and her daughters for years, but were unsuccessful. Authorities said they now know Honeychurch and the girls left California at some point and made their way to New Hampshire, but were never heard from again. In 1981, Denise Baldwin introduced her family to her boyfriend Bob Evans at the time, at a family gathering in Manchester, New Hampshire, about 25 minutes away from the property in Bear Brook State Park, where the two barrels were found. Baldwin is still missing to this day. Honoring Rasumi's victims. In November of 2019, Honeychurch's family members held a funeral for her and her two daughters. Diane, Rasumi's daughter, who helped authorities piece together his past, was invited to attend. While there, she met Honeychurch's family for the first time. As for the middle child, Reventer said she's hopeful she will be identified soon. Honeychurch's family said they still keep that child in their hearts. And we will be right back. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for watching this Friday evening edition of the Riley King Network Investigates. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Friday evening, and I'll see you back here next Friday for another edition of the Riley King Network Investigates. Have a wonderful weekend, and have a great week. Goodbye.